We have Chris Bishop on the line, who comes to us from Tshwane, from where some of the protests are happening in the capital city.
Chris, I must say, I imagine most people are not yet aware of the Fitch rating, but the reason why you are there is because you are covering the protest action in the name of hashtag Zuma stepping down. Just paint a picture of exactly what you're seeing there.
Well, I think the news is slowly filtering down here, but most people are not aware. As you can see, the protest here behind me is now breaking up. Probably about 5,000 to 10,000 people have left in the last 20 minutes. It was about 30,000, maybe 25,000 people marched here on the union buildings. It's been very, very peaceful. It has been, again, a bit like the earlier protests in some parts of Johannesburg. It was almost like a festival type atmosphere rather than an angry protest. But just behind me here, you can see the barbed wire that's been put up and the fences that have been put up at the entrance to the union building. So there was never any real chance that protesters were going to get right up against the seat of government here in Pretoria, the union buildings. And there's been a lot of flag waving, placard waving, a lot of chanting. Just a few minutes ago, some people were talking about the EFF, saying, "Where are they?" And lo and behold, they came shouting and chanting through the crowds here, making their particular protest. But there was a lot of people here. I spoke to Ali Bakr a bit earlier, the head of the cricket union, and he was saying that he thought that it was great, you know, the first time since the early 90s he's seen people of all races standing, protesting together. But there could have been more people here. I mean, just to sum it all up for you, as we were walking in to this protest, a bloke came out and looked and said, "Oh, is there any more coming, or is this it?" So I think that's just about sums up the day in total.
Chris, it's Karabole Hlahla on the desk. Now, my question is, when you read the mood, you were earlier at Luthuli House. You also went to see how the DA march was coming along. What we've seen as the basis of this march, and a lot of frustrations behind this active citizenry that we're seeing right now, has been as a result of the downgrade and the recall, if you like, and the removal of former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan. Do you expect that as a result of what is happening right now, the news of Fitch downgrading South Africa's debt, do you think there will be a much more nuanced response to that too? Do you think that these protests will carry on as a result?
Well, sorry, it's a very long question. There's a lot of noise here. I just got a police siren in the background. A lot of people still chanting. It's quite difficult to hear, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying. I mean, I think, sure, this is a good early sign of protest, yes. But I honestly and sadly think, I mean, I've covered liberation movements from here up to the Congo for many, many, many years. And I think the sad part about it is I don't think anything's going to happen, any chance of any form of change, until things get a lot worse for the poorer people in this country who are already struggling, already having a hard time. And I think then you might see angrier unrest, you might see more radical action, and that's a very sad thing. And then again, as we've seen in other countries I've covered, like Zimbabwe, sometimes, you know, 20 years ago there were mass protests in Zimbabwe, and yet the same people are still running the country. So it's a very difficult one, but I don't think this is the last one we've seen, and I think that quite some time we're going to see other protests in this vein in the next few weeks, especially as the downgrades keep coming, as you've said, and maybe as economic conditions get harsher and harsher.
Talking about harsh economic conditions, Chris, we're actually going to put you on hold and try and ascertain whether we're in for harsher economic conditions. And obviously this follows the Fitch decision to downgrade both our local and foreign currency rating to junk. And joining us on the line right now is Kokkie Kooyman, who is a fund manager at Nedbank, South Africa's financial fund. Kokkie, I suppose the first point of departure would be, were you surprised by Fitch's decision?
Well, I think the market is saying that as well, that we are surprised by the timing, that it's come this quickly, but not by that it happened. It's inevitable that we do get the downgrades, But the fact that they are reacting so quickly shows that they do see the severity and the impact of what the President has done and the loss of confidence they've got in our debt levels and our ability to repay debt going forward.
Kokkie, it's Karabo on the line. Now, when you look at the manner in which this just came out, I spoke to an economist, Tabi Lioka, who I called now to let her know about the developments, and she was very surprised that we're getting downgraded during the day. She says downgrades are normally after market close. Are you surprised?
Yeah, no, totally right. It's normally after market close, so that the market gets time to think about it before reacting. And so it will be interesting to see, but I think, again, it shows that obviously they had a meeting, they discussed it and said, we've made the decision, let's announce it. I think what is more important here now, we've now got Fitch, who are not so important in terms of the three rating agencies. They're the smallest one. They've downgraded us 2 notches. So 2 notches to get to junk, and that is another very important. Normally they go 1 notch at a time. So normally they would have first downgraded 1 notch and we would have left us above investment grade. So I think there is another surprise. Most the capital markets, I think, have been expecting S&P as well, which is now the other important one, and Moody's, to downgrade 1 notch at a time. So which means the whole process of getting to junk takes longer. But if the others now follow and go 2 notches, then we'll be junk status by all 3 before the end of next week. Now, the implication of that is serious, because that means there's about 636 million rand worth of, dollar worth of debt held offshore by portfolio investors whose mandate prevents them from holding debt that has been as junk rated. So they will be forced sellers of South African debt, which will put quite a downward pressure on the rand.
Well, Kokkie, I'm sure many of us are praying that situation that you've just described that does not happen. But just explain to us exactly what this means. That is, Fitch downgrading both the local and the foreign currency status to a junk.
Yeah. So the rating agencies, their job is to tell investors or to give them a rating in terms of their comfort or the prognosis about whether the paper or the country standing behind the paper or the company will be able to repay its debt. And so once you get to junk, that means they're becoming quite uncertain about either the ability or the willingness of the country to repay its debt. So, and again, now the fund managers who take this paper on behalf of their investors, who are often pension fund investors in pension funds all over the world, they hold this paper, and as soon as it gets downgraded to junk, they are forced to then sell the paper. And when they sell South African debt, that means the price gets pushed down, and it means that when we now want to replace that paper, so maybe one other technical problem is that the paper normally has a duration. So every 2 or 3 years it has to be replaced. We've got to issue new paper. And so when we now come with a new issue to fund our government debt, we will have to pay significantly more in terms of a higher interest rate for that same amount of debt. So the answer to a long reasoning is that interest rates in South Africa will rise, and putting further pressure on the consumer and putting further downward pressure on the economy. So I think this means that next year we will go into a recession, and it means unemployment will rise as well.
Kokkie, we're going to ask you to stay with us on the line. We're just checking up on the Pretoria situation with Chris Bishop, the Forbes Africa editor, who's joining us from location there. Chris, What is currently happening? What is the mood like as the information trickles through to some of the marchers there?
Well, as you can probably see, people are streaming away now in their thousands. It's pretty much the end of the protest, the end of the day here. I think there was a lot of anger, bit of anger earlier on here, a lot of people chanting all kinds of slogans about the president. And I mean, one image for me near the entrance of the Union buildings here is one of the old World War artillery pieces. Where the people sat on it with banners saying, you know, Zuma should be fired. That was one of it that stood out for me. But it's pretty much the end of the day. We have talked to some people here who they say they are organising. There are going to be other protests in the future. And I think maybe this is the first of many, but maybe with the current economic conditions and the downgrades, things are moving a bit faster than people thought. And the sad part about it is, I think business in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, is what we cover with Forbes Africa, is going to suffer. I think that it's really going to feel what's happening in these last few days or so.
Most definitely, Chris, and as you say, we'll be keeping a close eye on developments from henceforth with this latest announcement from Fitch. But Chris, we're going to let you go there for now and just get back to Kokkie. Kokkie, I've just looked at the Rand, and again, not the biggest reaction to this news. Can you tell us why?
I think, well, firstly, it looks like a lot of people are still out there in the streets and protesting, but I was expecting the Rand to move more as well. But it often takes time. You know, it doesn't happen that quickly. I think initially when news came through that Finance Minister Gordon was recalled from London, only in the evening when the US markets opened did the Rand really start falling. And I think the South African investors generally already have a lot of their money offshore, and so it's your foreign investors who will really are big enough to move the needle. And, you know, news travels a bit slowly, well, not that slowly, but your big players first have to have a meeting. So a meeting needs to be called, the decision is made, and so give it a few hours, but I would be surprised if the Rand doesn't fall quite a few percentage points in the next 24 hours.
Kokkie, it's Karabo again. As news like this, you know, continues to flow and trickle down on the markets, I am sure you guys at Net Group are out there in the back recalibrating some of your expectations. Now, being dropped is, even though you're saying that Fitch is the smaller of the two, I'm sure this means that you must recalibrate your expectations for growth. What's the house view? Where are you sitting at right now? What is the year likely to look like? Are we at minus 0?
Yeah. Just before I answer the question, I actually have, in that regard, two employers. I run the Nedbank, or the Net Group Financial Fund for Net Group, but I work for Denker, which is held by Sanlam, and I actually run the Global Financial Fund for Denker. So I've actually got two employers in that regard and two sets of. But the answer is still the same. I think already when Minister Gordon, or then Minister Gordon, was recalled, everybody started going to meetings and did their scenario planning as to what could possibly happen. And obviously, when he was fired, you know, then you get firmer ideas about your scenarios. And so the outlook now is pretty negative because the downgrades mean higher interest rates. It will mean a lower Rand. I can't see anything that will prevent the Rand from still falling quite a bit, which means your cost of living for everybody will increase. And as you know, it's the poor who get hurt the most by an increased cost of living. So the cost of food and the cost of transport will go up. It also means that investors who were planning to invest in terms of creating new factories, new jobs, will stand back. And so it definitely means that next year we should see negative growth unless there's an outside factor. But negative growth just means also that unemployment will go up and you will definitely get increasing social unrest. And so the problem where we are now is that you into a rolling situation which could increasingly get worse. And so you'll find investors adjust as it gets worse, but very few are afraid to right now make a big move and decide that the rand will go to 14.50. But I think it will go to 14.50 most probably over the next few months.
That was Kokkie Kooyman, Fund Manager of Net Group SA Financial Fund. Now, we're going to be joined back on the line by Chris Bishop, Forbes Africa editor, who joins us on the line from the capital city of Tshwane, right in front of the Union buildings. Now, Chris, I don't know if you can hear me yet, but if you can, Chris, a lot of this, you've interacted with some of the marchers, you've heard what they have to complain about. South Africa remains with a high number of the unemployed. Did you see some of these unemployed people? Are they out there also in numbers protesting the mismanagement of this country?
Yeah, well, there was a mixture, actually, of people. That was one of the things that was encouraging about the protests I've attended to today in Johannesburg and Pretoria, which, again, it's a good thing. You don't want to think in a society such as this one that you just have one type of person protesting, another one not protesting, etc. Just be careful in the background. There's more music coming our way. The noise is going to get worse. But anyway, and that was a good thing. And there were a lot of people. There were like academics here. There were business types here. There were one or two big shots here. But there were also a lot of the people. There were students here, lots of students here. But also there are people as well who are here to say that basically they've had enough. And to get so many people from so many backgrounds all in the same place at short notice really shows me that even if nothing happens after this protest, it shows me clearly there's something very, very wrong.
And Chris, so you started off in Johannesburg, now you're in Pretoria, and you also were at the DA marches. Just tell us what stood out for you from the three marches that you covered today.
Well, the one thing that stood out for me is the kind of obviously the determination. So the national anthem is coming on in the background, as you may hear, as I speak here in Pretoria at the Union buildings. Probably a good place to say it, probably a good day to sing it. But one thing I noticed is the sort of geniality. I mean, I've been on a lot of protests here. If you think just a year or 2 years ago, this particular place behind me here was like the protest for fees must fall. And as you know, that was a very violent protest. I mean, I remember the pictures with the tear gas and people fighting here. I mean, it looked like a scene from a battlefield from the 18th century. I mean, really, and by contrast, you've had people from all walks of life here. You've had EFF, all the political parties, a lot of dissent, but on the other hand, no real violence here. So it's a very, very strange, in some ways, a very odd day as well.
Chris, it's Karabo again. Now, I just want to know, as part of a march, you know, traditionally, I'm an 80s kid. Traditionally, when I hear of marches, I wonder if there's going to be a memorandum of demands, who is going to be handed out to, and that way I know that there is another person listening on the other line. Who is listening at the end of this line? Is there a memorandum? Who is it getting delivered to? Is there a sign that government is aware that people are this unhappy?
Well, that's one of the stories of the day. By the way, the national anthem just finished to a great big cheer in the background. You probably heard it. But that's one of the issues of the day, is that normally when you have a protest of this size, people go up to government, they go up the steps, they give a memorandum, shake hands, and it's accepted. But on this day, nothing. There was no word from the government about any memorandum being accepted. And again, as I pointed out earlier, just behind me over here, you can see there's barbed wire. You can see that there are huge fences to stop people from going where is their right up to the Union buildings. And again, heavy police presence. So, I mean, really, there was never a chance that people were going to get anywhere near handing over a memorandum. But the very fact that the government couldn't be bothered, seemingly, to accept the memorandum, which it just shows currently the state of relations between the state and its people right now.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for those insights. We're going to let you go right now. That was Chris Bishop, who is Forbes Africa's managing editor.